Should you homeschool? Should you trust the public school? Should there be school choice? These are questions that we're hearing a lot about. Plus, we're talking about possibly getting rid of the Department of Education, which I'd be in favor of. To those points and a whole lot more, it's Corey DeAngelis, Senior Fellow, American Culture Project, also the author of The Parent Revolution. Corey, how are you? Good to see you.
Hey, doing well, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Really glad to have you on. You know, we've been following each other for a long time on socials, and I'm glad that we had the time. Right now, looks like critical mass where we might be able to get rid of what is a very broken education system. Let's go back to the 70s. Do you have any idea why Jimmy Carter decided that we would do a Department of Education to begin with?
Yes, it was a political payoff by Jimmy Carter to the NEA, which is the largest teachers union in the country, the National Education Association. And the expressed, point of getting rid of having the department was to close achievement gaps and to improve educational outcomes. None of that has happened, obviously. Things have actually gotten worse, and we've spent about $2 trillion since the inception of the Department of Education. It's not necessary at all. We don't need it. We have 50 state departments of education already. So why do we need another one in D.C.? We should have more local control. We should send that money back to the states, and Trump is taking actions to do just that.
Well, it's always the story of we want better education. We want to take care of people better than community. We want to close that education gap. All that sounds fine, but as you said, none of it has worked. In fact, it's just turned into sort of $100 billion for indoctrination every year, no?
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad the new Department of Education put out a press release saying that they're going to get rid of some of these DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that divides kids based on immutable characteristics, divides people based on race and other characteristics, which is hugely problematic. I'd say it's racist. And so I'm glad they're trying to give it death by 1,000 cuts, but hopefully we can get rid of this department altogether, because the word education is not in the U.S. Constitution. We have no role for the federal government in education, so we should get rid of it. It's a violation of the 10th Amendment. And so Trump has a good proposal. There's actually a proposal in Congress right now from a senator named Mike Rounds, a Republican out of South Dakota, called the Returning Education to the States Act. It would block grant the funding that's currently at the federal level back to the states, and they'd spend the money as they'd see fit on education. So you'd actually have more money to spend on education because you'd be wasting less of it on useless bureaucrats pushing paper thousands of miles away in D.C. They currently employ over 4,000 people at that federal agency that shouldn't exist at all. So you'd have more money for the states to spend on education. They do a better job. And look, the latest national assessment came out called the Nation's Report Card, finding decades of learning loss. We spend about $20,000 per student per year in the government-run schools. That's about 52% higher than average private school tuition in this country. We spend more than just about any other country on the planet. And our international assessments just came out recently as well, finding an embarrassment, an international embarrassment. We dropped 18 points in math. That's more than just about every other country except for Iran, Kazakhstan, and one other. I mean, it's horrendous, and it's partially because we kept our schools closed for so long during the COVID era, because the unions knew they could hold children's education hostage for more money.
Corey, hold that book up if you don't mind. It's called The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Running Our Schools. Go and get that right now. It's available. He's the author of that book. Also, a senior fellow American Culture Project is Corey DeAngelis. So I was in school. I'm older than you. I was in school before the Department of Education. I was in school after the Department of Education. I didn't see a huge change because I graduated in 1984. But I do know this. They weren't just teaching us to a test. I do want us to assess how our kids are doing, but right now it appears, I think where you are and where I am in Texas, it's the STAR test. We're teaching to a test at the end of the year, and it almost takes all of the creativity away from teachers. I learned a lot in school. I learned a lot. I was very good at math. I was very good at science, all advanced classes throughout high school, and then I was in some sort of stupid advanced college courses that I didn't want to take. I was a music guy. But having said all of that, I fear that had I dealt with a Department of Education-run public education system, they would have dumbed it all down for me. So what you said earlier makes sense. Let's close the gap. But it sounds like they were closing it by making those who were achieving achieve less to make those who weren't achieving feel like they were achieving more instead of actually lifting everybody up through education. Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's a race to the bottom, right? So they have their goals that they put out for people to have certain levels of proficiency. Instead of raising the bar and having people do a better job and have the teachers work harder and to implement things like merit pay, the teachers unions fight against that every step of the way because they fight to protect the lowest common denominator. And what does that do? The best teachers say to hell with this, and they leave. They go do something else. Math teachers become engineers where they could make a lot more money. Whereas if they had policies to reward the best teachers, you'd keep them in the system and the kids would do better as a result as well. So I don't want people teaching to the test either. I think the whole factory model of schooling is outdated and causes a lot of problems when it comes to actual learning. I mean, you think about how you or I learn, Joe. We don't think about a test that we're going to take. We usually go and research things. We read a book. We ask experts questions. We look things up, watch videos. We don't have it force fed down our throats by sitting in a room for 8 hours a day for 13 years of our lives. And that crushes creativity. I think homeschooling is actually the way to go. But if you're going to have schooling as an option, the money should follow the child, and it should be up to the parent, whether that's homeschool or maybe it's a private school or a charter school. If the public school is not working for you, some public schools are great, but when they're not, families need to be able to say, hey, I think my kid can learn better over here. Maybe there's a different specialized mission that works for their kid. Or maybe they see that there's radical indoctrination in their classroom where they're teaching critical race theory or gender ideology. Maybe that's why the test scores have gotten so bad too. If they're focusing on all these other things, they're not focusing on the basics like math, reading, and writing. That becomes a problem. And when you tell kids that just because of your background characteristic that you're destined for failure or that you're an oppressor, that probably has a negative effect on their academic achievement too.
Well, I think so. I mean, obviously in places like Washington State and Oregon, they're talking about not even grading anymore. We can't grade anymore because it's unfair to those who are marginalized. I'm not really sure I understand. So if you don't grade them and then you make them pass because that makes you feel better as an educator, probably that isn't really the reason why. They just want to have better scores or make it look like their schools are achieving better. When that person goes to society, they're done. They can't succeed at all. They're not going to be productive at all. We're literally saying that black and brown, as they're already said, or BIPOC, is not as smart as white, so therefore we must dumb it all down to make them feel better. I have an idea. Find out why BIPOC, which is a dumb term, find out why other than white kids or other than Asian kids are not doing as well in school, then fix it. Wouldn't that be better?
Yeah. Exactly, but that makes the job more difficult for the teachers and the other employees in the system.
But it should be difficult, Corey. It should be difficult.
Yeah, it shouldn't be this problematic. But the thing is, the government school system has become more of a jobs program for adults than an education initiative for kids. And when you see where the money goes, it goes towards just hiring more administrators. We have data on this from 2000 in the U.S. Since 2000, the number of students in the system has slightly increased by about 5%. The number of teachers in the system, about twice that rate, has grown by about 10%. But the number of administrators has increased by 95%. The money is not allocated even to the teacher salaries. They're not really seeing a lot of the money. Since 1970, we've increased per student spending by 164% after adjusting for inflation. Teacher salaries have been relatively flat, have only increased by about 3% in real terms. So the money's not making its way into the classroom. We have plenty of money we're spending on schooling, but it's not going towards education. It's not going towards the kids. And that's why I argue for school choice, that when things get so bad that they're not spending your taxpayer dollars wisely, that money is meant for the kids. It should follow them to the school that best meets their needs and aligns with their values. And parents know best. They have that information on the ground about what their kids need, and they have the incentive to make that decision correctly about their kids' education because they have to live with their children the rest of their lives, and they care about them more than anybody else. So they're going to get that decision right.
Book is called The Parent Revolution. Go and get it. It's Corey DeAngelis. He is the author of that book. When it comes to school choice, obviously, if you're using your brain, and you are, and I am, and a lot of people watching and listening are, we know that it exponentially helps lower income areas much better, failing school areas much better. Those people in those areas would not have access to a private or a charter school otherwise, and now we're taking taxpayer dollars and allowing them to use them as they see fit to get away from a failing public school system. Why do you think that the left has been so successful in pretending it works the other way? Because it doesn't. It doesn't help the rich people. They can already send them.
Because they have status quo bias, right? We've had this system where you're assigned to a school just based on where you live, which is extremely inequitable. It causes a lot of inequality because the lowest income are trapped in the worst failing government-run failure factories that we call schools. And if you fund the student directly and allow families to vote with their feet, you're going to allow the least advantaged to have more opportunities. School choice is an equalizer in that sense, but they fear monger every step of the way too. They say, oh, this is going to destroy the public school system. That has never happened. We have evidence of this all across the country. You can look at places like Florida where they have school choice for every single family. They have over 500,000 kids using scholarships to go to private or homeschool scenarios in Florida, and their outcomes have gotten better. They have 10 out of 11 academic studies there showing positive effects, that school choice is actually a rising tide that lifts all boats, leads to better outcomes in the public schools, not worse. So the fear mongering just hasn't played out. And those arguments are falling on deaf ears now because it's like the boy who cried wolf. It never comes true. They're screaming, they're claiming that the sky is falling. It's Chicken Little, but the sky is not falling. It's actually the public school system has improved as a result of school choice.
Well, it has to, because it's basic competition. If there's only one burger joint in town, you get several mediocre burger and make money. If somebody else shows up and does a better burger, you're going to start losing money unless you raise your game. That's always what it's been about. So again, let's go back to the initial intention. And I think Jimmy Carter was a horrible president. I'll be honest with you. Either he wasn't smart enough to do it, or he was doing things that were very left-wing and progressive very quietly with a smile on his face. Having said that, if the intention was to make education better, and we know by the numbers education has gotten worse, and you just blew my mind with the fact that we've got 90% more administrators. That makes no sense at all because we're having, worse education. Why wouldn't it be a no-brainer to say, okay, let's make sure that the Department of Education also makes funds available. If you're not going to get rid of it, and I want to get rid of it, so do you, but if you're not going to get rid of it, let's make sure funds are available to everybody so we can force public schools to get better. Has it just become a payoff factory for the unions, really?
Yeah, when you look at the entire government school system itself, it's become a money laundering operation for the Democrat Party. You look at Randy Weingarten's union. She lobbied the CDC to make it more difficult to reopen schools during COVID. She's the head of the American Federation of Teachers. You look at where the money goes each political cycle. It's available on a website called Open Secrets for everybody to see. 99.9%, I'm not kidding you, of their campaign contributions went to the Democrats in 2024. And it's been like that for decades. It's a money laundering operation. It ought to be illegal. And that funding should instead go to the kids, not to the adults in the system, not to people like Randy Weingarten who make over $500,000 a year. It should go to the parents. It's meant for their children. They know how to make these decisions best for their kids. And that's the only reason why you have blue states that don't have school choice. It's because, Democrat voters, they use school choice programs. If you look at the charter schools, there's a lot of low-income families, non-white families using them. You look at the DeSantis victory in 2018 in Florida. He won because of school choice moms. Black moms in particular, according to exit polling, came out in force for DeSantis because his opponent, Andrew Gillum, called to get rid of their scholarship program for their kids to get a better education out there. So school choice is the right thing to do, but it's also a political winner as well. But the thing is, for Democrats, they're a wholly owned subsidiary of the teachers union because they get so much of this political support from the government school monopoly. It makes it really tough for them to vote for their constituents, the actual families, because they have special interests that control them. Hopefully that'll change soon. The more that the Republicans win on this issue, it's going to become more damaging for Democrats to oppose it. And we saw Trump, he won the parent vote by 9 points after consistently campaigning on this issue of school choice, abolishing the Department of Education. And he was beating in the polls as well against Kamala Harris on the issue of education, specifically with voters. If you look at the polling from Atlas Intel right before the election. So that basically it never happens. Democrats usually win on education and Republicans win on things like the economy and crime. But Trump won on education too, which goes to show you that Democrats need to read the tea leaves and come along because the parents are holding them accountable at the ballot box.
Well, I'll say this. I hope they don't. I hope they don't read the tea leaves. I hope they don't wake up. Right, we just keep on getting rid of them. It is Corey DeAngelis. He's the author of The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Running Our Schools. Go and get it right now. Let me ask you about homeschooling. A lot of people say homeschooling is the best choice, and I get that. It makes sense if you can afford to do so. The fear is that, well, both mom and dad are working, or maybe it's a single-parent household. How do you possibly get that done? What advice would you give people watching right now who think even school choice isn't good enough unless choice includes homeschooling? I'd like to teach my kids at home, but I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah, so the best way to do that is to implement something called an education savings account program. So it's different from a voucher, whereas vouchers can basically only be used for brick and mortar private school tuition. That's a step in the right direction. It would be a policy win, but I think a better policy is what's being proposed in Texas right now and what has gotten across the finish line in a lot of other red states in recent years. 15 states have passed universal school choice in the past 4 years alone. We're winning so much, I'm almost getting tired of winning. But my home state's next. It's on deck. We have an education savings account proposal where you could use the funding for private school tuition if that's the best option for your kid.
Right.
But it also goes to a savings account. That money that would have followed you to the government school, you could still take it there if you want. But if not, you can go somewhere else. And then parents direct that funding. And you can also use it for homeschool expenses like curriculum, private tutoring. You can even use it for micro schools, which became really popular over the past few years, where when the government schools were closed during COVID, families were setting up what they called pandemic pods, 5 to 10 children getting together in a household. Families were trying to figure out how to economize the process of homeschooling. So even if you can't do a pure homeschooling setup, maybe you could do hybrid homeschooling, where you go in person a few days a week, and then you do homeschooling the rest of the days of the week. And then it just depends on what the individual family can figure out. They have homeschool co-ops. So there's a lot of other options besides just pure homeschooling. And if the money followed the child, that would be more economically feasible for you to access.
The Parent Revolution is the book. Go and get it. It's Corey DeAngelis. Go follow him on social media as well. Corey, only about 30 seconds on a very complicated topic, but that's all I have left. Why do you think the great red state of Texas, where we both reside, has taken so long to get school choice done? Is it a matter of ceding some sort of power to the Democrats that they didn't get elected to receive? What's the problem here?
Yeah, the Senate always passed the bill. The House had too many rhinos, but they got taken out in the last election because parents have woken up like we've never seen before. 21 Republicans voted against their own party platform issue of school choice last year, joined all the Democrats. And guess what? Now, after the primaries and the general election, 14 of them are gone. And that was a political earthquake. Parents held them accountable at the ballot box. Now we have the votes for universal school choice in Texas. And, they said for a long time it's because that we had rural areas. But guess what? The 9 most rural states in the country already have some form of private school choice. And the oldest scholarship programs in the country started in the late 1800s in Maine and Vermont, specifically for kids in rural areas. So school choice it's a good thing for kids who don't have a lot of options. And they figured that over 150 years ago. I'm glad that we're figuring it out in Texas now. And it's gonna pass. We have enough votes in both chambers.
Yes. Well, I love that. That's very good news for all of us. The Parent Revolution is the book. Go get it. It's Corey DeAngelis. Corey, let's do it again. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. Good talking to you.
All right, brother. We're back after this. Stay right here.